Jed, what's coming?
Double homicide, one male, one female. Killer's male, white, 40s.
Set up a perimeter and tell them we're en route. I'm placing you under arrest for the future murder of Sarah Marks. Give the man his hat.
The future can be seen.
All we have to run on are the images that they produce.
We see what they see.
There hasn't been a murder in 6 years. There's nothing wrong with the system. It is perfect. I agree.
Murder can be stopped.
Tell me exactly what it is you're looking for.
Flaws.
You ever get any false positives? We are arresting individuals who have broken no law.
But they will.
The fact that you prevented it from happening doesn't change the fact that it was going to happen.
The system can't be wrong.
You say something, Chief?
No.
You're in a lot of trouble, John. I have a warrant in my pocket that says murder.
Don't run.
You don't have to chase me.
From 20th Century Fox
He set me up. He set me up.
and DreamWorks Pictures.
Who's the victim? I've never heard of him, but I'm supposed to kill him in less than 36 hours.
He's coming here to get her.
Tom Cruise
I need your help. If you contain information, I need to know how to get at it.
in a Steven Spielberg film.
I have to know. I have to find out what happened in my life. You tell me, who was it that set this up?
I don't know.
How about now?
Hello everyone, Jay Saki here, coming in with a review, joined by my brother Wilson. Wilson, how's it going?
What's going on?
Well, we just watched Minority Report from 2002. What a year. Okay, so 2002, that was the year that brought us a whole list of films that came out that year. We Were Soldiers, K-19 Widowmaker, The Pianist, Heart's War, The Sum of All Fears, Gangs of New York, Equilibrium, Count of Monte Cristo, Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, Ice Age, Treasure Planet.
Jonah, a VeggieTales movie.
There you go. The Country Bears, Attack of the Clones, Signs, Born Identity, Insomnia,
Red Dragon.
The Importance of Being Earnest, Spider-Man. Yeah, a lot of films.
So, I saw the movie back in theaters with our older sisters back in the day. I was still in high school. But this is your first time seeing the movie, yeah?
Yes, I remember the TV ads. I remember you going to see the movie and talking it up a whole lot. I remember at some point, I think somebody rented it and walking through the room. So I remember seeing bits of it. But, so...
The most interesting thing to me is, in theaters, it blew me away. And I'm sure I saw it since then, but I just have one big impression of seeing it. I remembered it being really super good and almost like the Manchurian Candidate. Ever since then, I've always said, oh yeah, Minority Report, one of the most underrated Steven Spielberg movies ever. Until we watched it again, and I realized, maybe it's not as underrated as I thought it was.
Yes.
What did you think of it? This is your first time?
Very, very mixed. It made me think of Blade Runner. Whenever I saw Blade Runner, I thought it was a movie that did not fully justify its runtime, but... Well, the point that Blade Runner was trying to make did not fully justify its runtime. But I still really, really, really enjoyed Blade Runner just as a 2001 Space Odyssey kind of experience. This movie, had an interesting idea. I feel like it did not fully justify the runtime for it to be so long about this topic.
Oh, what was the runtime?
2 hours and 19 minutes.
Okay.
Very, very lovely, fun sci-fi concept to explore. It probably could have been shortened down. It was definitely treating itself oh, this is the very first time this has ever been done, so there's sort of a slow pace to it, showing the technology, showing what's going on, the world. I'm sure maybe at the time, oh, this was really interesting, but I feel like today they would be okay, you're drawing it out. We can kind of, from the very start, you kind of know where the story's going. Maybe back then people didn't know where the story was going because it was still a new idea.
Yeah, that's not the movie's fault, though. But I totally get what you're saying. I mean, there's also an issue with once you've seen enough movies, there's certain elements which you can guess at. That when you are, I must have been 16 at the time, 16-year-old in theater, it's all new to you. But I would say some of the things we look at as cliche back in the day were not. And that's not really the movie's fault. On its own standards, for the time it came out, what would you rate it?
If I saw it in theaters back then, I'd probably think it was pretty great.
But then when we were young and stupid, we probably thought all kinds of things were pretty great.
Yes, I'll say this, it's one of those things where, a lot of effort. There was no shortage of effort, like they really thought out their script, all the nuances, the details, little setups and payoffs. Totally applaud the effort.
Let's actually talk about some of that.
Actually, I think we're getting too far ahead of ourselves. What is this movie about? What is the premise?
Okay, well, for anyone who's never seen Minority Report before, it's the concept of law enforcement in the future. I believe it's the year 2052, 2053. And there's a system in place by which crimes that have not, specifically murders that have not yet been committed, can be predicted and seen visually by law enforcement in the future, to the extent that they can go and stop the murderer before he even commits the murder. And the man can then be arrested and imprisoned without ever having actually murdered someone. And this system has essentially annihilated all murders in Washington, D.C., which is the experimental grounds on which this law enforcement program is taking place. And everything is running fine. They're 2 weeks away from nationalizing and going public. And then the chief of the law enforcement group, played by Tom Cruise, discovers that there's a prediction that he's going to murder somebody. And this sets off a chain of events where he has to flee the pre-crime organization while being pursued by his former colleagues. And all wrapped up in this is the conspiracy behind where these visions of his murder came from, or of him committing a murder came from. Yes. As well as big questions concerning whether you can actually know if someone's going to follow through with a crime, if you stop it before it happens, etc.
Exactly, and then stuff happens. Hijinks, not literal hijinks, but is Tom Cruise being set up, or is he going to be committing a murder? Police chases. Tom Cruise, stop, want to take you in.
Okay, do you want to talk about what did work or did not work first for you?
Oh...
Let's go with what did work first, because that's probably going to be a shorter list. And some of the stuff we might disagree about, but you go first. Like, what did you like about it?
I like Tom Cruise. I remember he had that same Tom Cruise vibe that everyone loves. And I'm like, yep, when Tom Cruise is in something, he has an intensity in his face. Or even if you don't completely get what's going on, like Tom Cruise gets it, and you're like, I better be concerned.
Man, it also brings you back while watching it when you think, wow, this movie probably released with the trailers of Tom Cruise's face first and foremost, and all the trailers, knowing that it was going to sell tickets because Tom Cruise was in it, because movie stars still mattered.
Tom Cruise has never stopped not mattering.
That's probably true. Okay.
Even back then, you can tell this role was made for Tom Cruise.
Now, this movie was directed by Steven Spielberg. Did any of that come across to you in a positive way?
It didn't feel like a Spielberg movie at all. It felt like he was clearly trying to do something different.
Maybe I'm asking, did any of the directing stand out to you in a way that a contrast to today's directors?
It felt very much so in its time, so the characters were constantly saying things or referencing things where you would tell like they wouldn't quite write that like that today because of social consciousness or something. It's like a more innocent time, so they could talk about things, explore topics, and you weren't constantly having like red flags be raised at every turn.
Yeah, I actually agree with you. I thought that was, for us of the year 2025, I thought that was fairly on display, that the movie felt unfettered by the politics of today and could explore its themes without hesitation.
Just a different world back then. So I would say, like, just on an educational level, it's like, oh, this is how people made films without thinking about politics exactly. I mean, maybe there was something political obviously there was something political on their minds, but not like today.
Right. Anything else that stood out to you in a positive way?
I mean, mostly for the movie, I was like, oh, refreshing old 2002 filmmaking storytelling. And I could already tell where the story was going. I had some spoilers because I was aware of something that was going to happen later. So it was kind of like this odd sense of get on with it. That being said, even if I didn't have any spoilers, I think I would still feel that way because there's still that, okay, you know where this is going because you know the tropes.
Right. Again, I would remark in the movie's defense, that's not the movie's fault. That at a certain point, you've grown old enough and you've seen enough movies that some themes present themselves to you.
Certainly, but it's still tragically we have to admit, it still causes things to become dated.
Right.
Although that being said, I thought I knew everything about the story, and around the midway point, I was confused because I was like, oh wait, that wasn't entirely what I thought. And then, in a way, maybe the second half was more interesting.
That sounds like a nice, pleasant surprise. For myself, I would say I thought some of the superior directing was on display. There's things that you never see before. I think you and I might disagree about this, but there are certain scenes which had a messiness to them which sold them better than I think a lot of movies today, a lot of action scenes today would sell themselves to me. And that is, there's a lot more, as I said, messiness, damage, violence, and chaos in the scenes. They're not clean. They're not smooth. And maybe what I'm seeing is just the practical effects. There's a lot of practical effects. There's a scene where Tom Cruise's subordinates come to arrest him, and they all have jetpacks, and they're in an alley surrounding him, and an action scene ensues that's very messy and looks from the way I took it in, it felt a lot more real to me. It sold it that that's the way something like that in the future would go down. Nothing about it was CGI, at least did not present itself as CGI to me, and the scene sold itself to me in that way, in a way which I feel like new movies just don't do. They're all too clean, and that makes my mind think that what I'm looking at isn't real. So I really appreciated the practical effects. I thought there was a lot of practical effects on display. When they did have CGI, I did feel the CGI was a little bit dated, but at the same time, the movie did not rely on CGI in the way that new movies do, the extent where I felt like it ruined the experience for me.
That is true. There was moments of CGI, but at the same time, it didn't completely rely on it, so good enough in that department.
Right.
I think on the action scenes, I was thinking to myself I kept thinking to myself, shouldn't this be trimmed down? Do they really have to have this whole scene? Can they just be like, don't run, Tom Cruise? Oh no, get him, he runs, and that could be it, because the action scene was just inconsequential.
That also might be because you're an older, jaded movie reviewer. Again, when I remember watching the movie for the first time, that thought never occurred to me once.
It was 2002, and you were younger and just enjoying seeing a sci-fi action film in the theaters.
I still enjoyed movies back then, right? Exactly. There are a lot of other things I want to like about the movie, but I felt like they were contingent and hinged upon things that, upon closer examination, created plot holes and made the whole movie not work. So maybe I could say I thought the acting was good. I remember back when I was young, and even this time around, I really liked Colin Farrell's character. I felt there was a certain appropriate subversion of expectations where there's one character who's kind of set up to be the bad guy, but he actually ends up being kind of a good guy.
Well, okay. Little spoilers, but...
Well, I didn't know we weren't doing spoilers.
Well, anyone who starts watching the movie will probably figure out. We'll allow for official spoilers in a moment. Okay, this is a retro review. Either you've seen this movie or you have not.
This movie is 22 years old, almost a quarter century.
Yes. Well, we'll just say for the moment, Wilson, do you recommend this movie?
It depends on to who. If you're the type of person that has limited time for movies, and when you watch a movie you only want to see the best, then no. I personally think day-to-day people should find the best, most edifying activities, books, movies they can spend their time with, friends, family, etc., and the rest can go by the wayside. If you're a real cinephile, lover of film, watcher of movies, then I actually think this movie is a really interesting look into how things have changed in the last 22, 23 years. But typically I think there's enough problems on display for this movie that I would say this isn't Spielberg's best, this isn't cinema's best. although it's far better than most anything which has come out in the last 10 years.
That's true. Okay, so I will say, on a purely educational level, because I love the education, time capsule film of things that were of the thought process of 2002. Yes, watch this. By the end, you'll be crying tears, like saying, why can't we go back to a more innocent time? Well, there was something else you said just now that jogged a thought in my head. 23 years later, what was it?
I said it's better than anything which has come out in the last 10 years.
Yes. That was it. I'm like, yeah, if this actually came out today, I saw it in theaters, I think I actually... That's a funny thing. I was just saying it's dated, but at the same time, maybe if it just came out, maybe if I just went to see it in theaters, maybe I would think this is pretty great.
I feel like this should roll into the things So it's like, here, the acting's good, the directing's good. What didn't we like about it then? I think maybe we should roll into that.
Okay, so I just... we may or may not be tossing out spoilers as we go at this point, so just given that warning. For me, it was just too long. I think this could have been trimmed down a lot. I think today it could have been like an hour and a half.
I don't know. Today moved there. Today, one of the biggest complaints is every movie has to be 3.5 hours long now. 2 hours and 19 minutes seems seems quaint by comparison.
I enjoy some long films, but for this movie, I'm just saying.
You don't think it justified?
I don't think it had to be 2 hours and 19 minutes.
For its concept.
I'm like, if you could have trimmed it down by 19 or written it down, basically. Because it's all about Tom Cruise basically running from the police and trying to figure things out, and it's getting dragged out. And maybe like with Blade Runner was just beautiful to look at in every scene. Like every shot in Blade Runner was like a painting. This movie wasn't quite achieving that.
No, I actually that's a really good way to, that's a really good comparison to make. Blade Runner is the type of movie that people either love or they don't. But I don't think anyone denies that there's a lot of art on display and that the creators of that film loved their craft and had a particular vision and a particular story that they intended to tell, where with Minority Report that's not quite as clear. The artistry is not quite as maybe iconic. Obviously it's not as iconic because a lot of people have not seen it. A lot of people don't remember this film, where Blade Runner is a piece of cinema history. But going back, the things that didn't quite... You said runtime. You think
okay, so here's one thing. There's a whole scene with Tom Cruise, like, in his self-driving car, and he has to, like, get out of the car while it's going down this, like...
vertical side of a building.
Yeah, and it's like he gets out, and he's, like, jumping from car to car, like Mario. And it was totally filmed just for, like, the trailer. Like, oh my goodness, this is exciting, but it was a great big showpiece that was completely unnecessary.
See, so here's one of the things I'm going to defend the film here. In 2002, we've gotten spoiled on special effects in the last 23 years. In 2002, that probably looked amazing and probably wowed the audiences in a way that, again, the movie can't be blamed 23 years later when you feel like it's a piece of bloat or it does not impress you so much. Or again, because you're older, you don't feel peril for the main character. I imagine those scenes were actually showing off to a large extent, which wowed audiences back in 2002 in a way which people are not impressed with today. So in some ways, some of those action scenes might seem boring and seem like bloat, but at the time was really showcasing what was it, New Line Cinemas and Fox?
DreamWorks.
DreamWorks and Fox could do with special effects. Companies were literally without the type of computer system, CPUs and GPUs of today. Back then, they were showcasing what their studios were capable of doing. And again, as a teenager watching that film, I don't remember ever being bored at any moment. I enjoyed the whole movie. So I think part of that is a product of its times, that back in the day, you would not have been bored at those scenes. Those scenes would have wowed you because you never would have seen anything like it before.
Certainly, but there are still better films that we go back and revisit from that time. People don't go back and watch Minority Report. Not that I'm aware of. Until today, no one has gone back and watched Minority Report.
Right.
This is the first time anyone has gone back to rewatch it.
I do think it's true that there's things which are timeless, stories which are timeless, that don't rely on special effects, so that the special effects never become dated. That's probably true.
Okay, so something I found actually amusing. There's all this like 60s and 70s science fiction where the characters either use certain technologies or make references to things, and it's like, oh, how cute. Back then, they thought in the year 2000 people would still be using tape recorders or records, and you're like, oh, they just could not predict how technology would change. But surely by the year 2002 they would have things figured out. No, like this movie has references where someone says, yeah, you better pick up at Radio Shack. It's like, Radio Shack, who remembers that?
So that was actually, I think that's the single biggest, that's the most interesting observation about this film. As a matter of fact, it's an interesting observation just about how people create future stories in general whenever you're doing sci-fi. The same thing could be said of Blade Runner as well.
Oh, definitely.
Except, interestingly enough, that's part of the charm of Blade Runner, is how, like, their cyberpunk future is this analog system that hasn't even transferred over to the type of digital world that we actually know today. But there's something actually charming about that. It's almost like an alternate reality where all computers remained analog rather than digital. But you're right. There's something very similar going on in Minority Report, where there's all types of technologies where you're like, okay, Steven Spielberg, and no disrespect, but the boomer figuring out what his boomer future is going to be, makes all these predictions, which actually, and you say, oh, well, the movie takes place in the year 2050 something, so the movie will have made all its money by then. It doesn't really matter. It's far enough in the future that you don't have to verify that your predictions are true. And yet, in the not too distant future from 2002, today, we have technological systems which actually outperform many of the things on display in the movie. As well as the movie maintains certain systems which are hardly relevant today. For example, there's a scene where you see magazines pour out onto the floor. The concept that...
Yes, magazines.
You have these digital magazines where people still buy U.S. News and World Report, but they have this kind of computer element to them, rather than the actual future we live in, where magazines are just not relevant and will not be relevant in 25 years because everything's transferred over to these little tiny pocket phones, pocket computers which didn't even exist back in 2002. You get quite a bit of that. We're now in the renaissance of artificial intelligence. And so, for example, one huge issue with the movie I saw was the entire technological system is very based on retina scans, that wherever you go, everything's scanning your retinas. Today, if a perfect stranger had a single picture of you without any other information, they could feed it into Google Images or Bing Images or any number of other image searches and probably find out who you are. In the movie, everything is based on retina scans. So back in 2002, the concept that we would have artificial intelligence which could recognize you by your face structure alone was unthinkable. And everything was retina scans. The whole future is going to be retina scans. All these little cameras are going to be constantly scanning your retinas so that people can locate you. And this actually ends up being a very dated aspect of the movie, where they have this whole computer system where they try to locate where a crime is about to take place so they go and stop a murderer from happening before it happens. And I was just thinking to myself the whole time, while they're trying to identify and find all kinds of clues to identify like who the exact murderer is and what location they live at, with today's technology right now, if you have an image of someone, if the law enforcement has an image of your face, they can figure out who you are and what your home address is in less than a second. Where in the movie, they were predicting that in 50 years, law enforcement would not have that technology. So there's little things like that which date the movie, which is interesting. I'm not going to blame Spielberg or the writers of the film for this.
Right, we're just bringing this up.
But it is interesting that if you are going to write, it's interesting that the movie is taking place 50 years in the future from 2002 because they felt that our technology was not going to arrive anywhere near what is on display in the movie for half a century. And 23 years later, much of our technology is more advanced than what was seen in the movie. So it's interesting, if you're going to make a movie about the near future, you better really think about it hard because there's a very good chance you're going to date yourself in just a few years.
But hey, they did get the self-driving cars, am I right?
Except heaven knows what we'll have in another 25 years.
Yeah. Maybe self-driving cars will fall out of vogue and people will want to drive their own car. Who knows?
Maybe we'll all be in little helicopter machines, who knows?
Yeah. I just know for me, a great way to summarize everything was, at the beginning of the film, there's a family having breakfast, and no one's on an iPad or a phone. And it's like, wow. How things have changed.
That's interesting. 6 years after this movie came out, the iPhone was going to hit the market. And once the iPhone hit the market, everything was going to change forever. And Spielberg could not predict that everyone would be walking about with a computer in their pocket 6 years after this movie came out. And the knowledge of that would have completely changed everything in the movie. And again, the movie takes place 50 years later from 2002. So it's just an interesting thing, not blaming Spielberg, but it's an interesting fact that if you're going to make a movie about a cyberpunk near future, you gotta really think about what you're doing because the moment your movie becomes dated, a lot of it becomes irrelevant and a lot of plot holes will start forming. Let me see. Oh, one other thing, however, this is unforgivable, and I will point it out. This is one thing I forgot. And that is the very plot of the movie itself creates its own hole, which dispels the whole movie. And that is, we're into spoiler territory, right?
Go ahead.
Yes? Okay. And that is, the system by which I was led to believe pre-crime works has to do with the intent of the murderer. And you have crimes of passion, and you have premeditated murder. The whole course of the film, the whole plot, is Tom Cruise being set up, except he is set up to kill somebody. Except the only way he is set up to kill somebody is the system which predicts crimes predicts that he will kill somebody. And if the system never predicted that, he never would be in danger of killing the person, right?
Right.
So that you have a huge flaw in the system called the precogs. Are they causing the murder? Because if they didn't predict it, they would not have caused a chain of dominoes to fall that leads to Tom Cruise finding a person he's supposed to murder.
Okay, I think I'd have to watch...
And that's completely different from every other murder in the movie.
Well, okay, I'd have to watch the movie again, but I think that was part of the point of the film, is that somebody jinxed the system. And I think that's why at the very end, the whole thing fell apart, because it can be jinxed.
Okay, I mean, yeah, we could get into that. We don't need to get into it. But I would say, at least for me, the way I read the movie is similar to time-traveling movies where you have like this circular cause and effect, which often goes on with going back in time and changing the past. This movie, I have a big question about the causality of a chain of events. Maybe somebody could explain that to me, maybe they couldn't, but that threw off a whole lot of the movie for me.
Yeah, I'm not saying you're wrong, I'm just saying I'd have to see it again to verify all that. I just thought that was the point, because I thought the whole point, we went over this.
Right. Would you recommend the movie?
Kind of on the education level, but I know most people are not into that. Like, there's a lot of movies I've seen that are actually kind of terrible, but I'm like, there's one thing that's fascinating. I'm like, oh, you should see this for this one fascinating element.
So for people who love film as much as you would recommend it. But people who are looking for the best in entertainment... No. For people who are like, I want to watch something that I can reliably invest my time in, no. But if maybe you're like, I want something that teaches me about the year 2002, you don't need to watch this movie to learn about the year 2002. There's all these better films that came out that year that we listed off. But still, overall, no, I guess I don't recommend the film strongly. I feel like the biggest issue is kind of what we talked about before, which is, what are you comparing this film to? because this film is phenomenal if you were to compare it to most other movies to come out in the last decade. But that says less about the movies that came out in the last decade than it does about this film. It's not necessarily a recommendation, it's just a commentary on how bad cinema's been for the last 10 years. And as a matter of fact, if you look like the movies we listed, it's like, K-19 Widowmaker. Most people have probably never heard of that. Most people have never seen that. It was an okay movie. It was a historical drama about a Russian submarine that almost had a nuclear meltdown and a bunch of heroism and like saving it. It is probably better than almost any movie that has come out in the year 2024. But that's not to say that it's a great movie. It's just to say that almost every movie that came out in 2024 was a piece of garbage.
Yeah, so, like, I mean, if we're to go back to 2002, if you said, I really want to watch a 2002 movie, I'd be like, well, okay, you got Equilibrium, Harry Potter, Chamber of Secrets, Treasure Planet, Spider-Man.
Yeah, Spider-Man really stole the spotlight that year.
Yep. We Were Soldiers, Born Identity, Signs. Any of these other movies also teach you about the year 2002. And
some of them are actually really good movies.
Yes. Okay, so trying to close this down now. What did we learn? Again, we probably been talking about what we learned, but in summary, what did we learn? I learned Spielberg tried to make a sci-fi film that was unlike anything stylistically he'd ever done. I guess I learned that Tom Cruise, Neil McDonough, and Colin Farrell all act alongside each other. It was interesting seeing Colin Farrell in one of his early roles before he got into heavier work, which seemed to come much later in his career.
I learned Hollywood used to be cynical of federal law enforcement.
Yeah, Hollywood was definitely politically very different back then. Yeah, like I said, we learned that they were less self-conscious of what would be today's politics. You can watch this film, say, oh, a movie about bad authoritarians overreaching, and you don't have to have that red flag, wait, what are you trying to say moment. Everyone can get behind the message of the movie, appreciate it for what it's trying to say, for what it is. Anything else?
No, I think that's it. Well directed, well acted, writing leaves a lot of questions.
It did not quite become greater than the sum of all its parts.
That's right.
But remember, everyone, sometimes what you get out of a movie is what you try to get out of it, you know? If you just watch a movie and say, that was okay, and then leave, then you learn nothing. But, stop, think about it, think about what you digested, try to learn something, and you might grow a bit, because, we all need to grow. We all need to become wiser than ourselves. We all need to become greater than the sum of all our parts. We need to be better than the movies we watch. And if you can't be better than the movies you watch, then I don't know what to tell you. Oh, actually, one more thing. All sci-fi is made to be dated. I think that's actually the biggest thing I learned from watching this movie. Have a good night, everyone.